Hello, everyone. Sorry, I kind of haven't posted anything for a while. Things got a little busy, but today I wanted to talk about the symbolism of Little Red Riding Hood. Now, the symbolism in Little Red Riding Hood is pretty interesting, and usually it gets reduced to don't talk to strangers, which that's a little bit deeper than that. But as we know, the story goes that Little Red Riding Hood's mother sends her out to bring a basket to her grandmother because she is sick. And in the basket, depending on various translations, it's usually cakes and wine. And the mother warns her to not to stay off the trail as she goes through the forest, and just stay on the trail until she gets to her grandmother's house. As she's on the trail, she comes across a wolf that starts questioning her, asking where she is going, what's in the basket. And then we get a little information of what the wolf's intentions are and really wanting to eat Little Red Riding Hood. Now, in the process, though, he finds out that she's going to her grandmother's. So he goes to the grandmother's first by distracting her, showing her that there's flowers and other gifts off of the path. And then he himself proceeds to go to Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother and eats her. And when he eats her, he disguises himself as the grandmother and waits for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive. Now, as we know, this is one of the most popular parts of the story. Little Riding Hood enters and begins to observe the wolf. And before she sees who the wolf is, gets eaten. Now, in some iterations of the story, it ends there. And in other versions, a hunter or a lumberjack comes in and cuts the stomach of the wolf open and frees both of them. And then the hunter takes the skin of the wolf for himself and travels onward. Now, at first, to understand, we see, like we said, the mother sends out Little Red Riding Hood out into the woods to go to her grandmother. Now, this is, in some sense, the parent sending out the child to go reach the grandmother is almost like the final point of the Little Red Riding Hood's destination as she goes through the cycle of growing up. So the grandmother is kind of a sense of, you can say, like, built wisdom already because she's an elder already experienced in the world. And so it's kind of, she has to travel through the world in order to to reach that ideal for herself, that ideal feminine for herself. And the mom gives her two refined gifts, which is cake or something like bread and wine, usually associated with something like the Eucharist in the culture, like the spiritual food, this nourishing food. And that is required, a required gift in order to reach that ideal feminine. So hence she has to deliver that to her grandmother. Now, as we keep moving on with the story, we see that the wolf is almost something like the serpent in the garden, or kind of like a monstrous force, a demonic force that wants to eat Little Red Riding Hood. And so, he starts first questioning her because she is young and hasn't yet reached that experience of the world like the grandmother. It's still her journey through it. And so the wolf kind of almost finds what her future ideal is. And in order to eat her, he has to get rid of her goal, like her ideal self, her ideal identity. And so, that's why he goes to the grandmother's house and eats the grandma. So he almost goes ahead and gets rid of the ideal for Little Red Riding Hood, almost losing a sense of purpose. Now, in Little Red Riding Hood's case, it's in a sense of her giving into her passion. As we see, she strays off the path and believes collecting kind of, you can say, fruits of the forest, flowers, mushrooms, and things like that, which cause her to lose herself a little bit. And then when she reaches the grandmother's house, she doesn't have that vision of the ideal grandmother anymore. And so hence she can't see the wolf as a whole, or can't distinguish between what her grandmother looks like. She just sees the idiosyncrasies of the wolf, like different parts. And before she's able to bring all those parts together, she herself gets eaten. So she ends up being kind of like in the belly of the beast. Now, with the story ending there, it's almost like her being devoured by hell, lost her ideal. And so she strayed off the path and lost herself, never got to reach the stage of the grandmother. And in other ways, when the hunter comes in and pulls her out of death, it's a kind of Christ-like figure, or sometimes we see similar images with something like Saint George or Saint Michael the Archangel, where they're standing over the dragon and piercing it. And so in the same sense, this hunter pulls them both out of death and saves them in the same way that Christ on the cross descends into death and pulls out everyone that has died before. Now, what's interesting is I don't think this just is a discussion about spiritual life just solely, but also I think it's a discussion about the cycle of the feminine. So you have a mother, you have the three stages kind of womanhood, the mother, the child or youth, and then finally the stage of the grandmother. Now, as a woman goes through something like cycles, like changes, and not to be crass, but it also built in within the kind of like the menstrual cycle, there's ebbs and flows and changes within the body that happens. I discussed this, I believe, before, kind of like the phases of the moon at the same time. That's why it's associated with the feminine. But in a sense, it's almost the same thing. It refers to a cycle in which a woman, as she travels out into her youth, experience, and then reaches the grandmother or has an experience of death, and then is pulled out again in this same kind of cycle where she has a period of fertility, and then kind of has a period of no fertility, and then the cycle starts over again. So it's kind of this built-in thing. Little Red Riding Hood is also wearing a red cape, or almost like a red veil. So, there's this aspect of hiddenness, but it's also red. And so in a way, it's building up a hierarchy of the feminine. And once again, I just kind of want to go back to this because I also think it's very interesting in that because Little Red Riding Hood strayed off the path, which it's just almost similar to when you see the icons of the ladder of divine ascent. You want to go up the ladder in the same, which is similar in that Little Red Riding Hood was headed towards her grandmother, which can kind of like heaven or the ideal. And she, in a way, fell off of it. And by falling off the path, or even kind of like falling away from the logos, you can see that she doesn't recognize herself in a way, in that because she couldn't recognize the grandmother or her final goal, she also was not able to realize who the beast was, and she just saw him in parts or idiosyncrasies, which is also what I've discussed before, kind of like the pattern of the satanic of going from unity down into different parts, or down to the pure individual instead of into like one complete communion. And you see that with her interacting with the wolf by mentioning that she sees his eyes, his paws, his teeth, but she doesn't see the beast himself. And then lastly, just want to mention that in other iterations of the story, the Little Red Riding Hood goes back to the grandmother, and they are visited sometimes by a second wolf. Now, in this case, they lock themselves in the house, but the wolf waits for them. But because they've gained, because the grandmother is there, and you can kind of see by Little Red Riding Hood's previous experience, they're able to outsmart the wolf by feeding him, by tricking him, that is, by putting scented water into a trough, causing the wolf to fall in and drown. But it still shows that there's still this sense of temptation or a beast that waits out for you to eat you. Now, in one sense, can I connect this today? And once again, I mean, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse with this one, but it's something similar also to the pattern of the drag queens, in that they, in a way, eat the identity of the feminine, and they wear it as a costume upon themselves, calling for others to them so they can, in a way, consume them to their own ideology as well. Being that they strayed away from the path, they don't recognize that it's almost like the people don't recognize that the wolf is wearing the grandma's clothing. Now, the other interesting thing is the whole idea, you can say that the whole LGBTQ movement and the stuff with the pride stuff is doing, in a sense, as a whole, the same thing, in that the more you learn, you realize that some of the people that are behind this movement follow satanic practices, and they will admit that even. And it's called pride, but they wear the color, like, it's almost like they wear the different colors as a costume to cover themselves from what they're actually doing. So you can almost imagine, Beast wearing pink grandma's pajama clothing so they don't look as ferocious, or even something a little comical, but similar, like a dragon almost dressed as a clown to try to disguise himself from what he really is. And, it kind of reveals also of what the pattern of the pagan belief systems are, in that the wolf is, in a sense, the gods of paganism, and pagans viewed things like passion and power and things that serve the body as things that are good. But at the end, that beast that you serve, that God, you can say, you serve from of pagan cultures, needs to eat somebody. It at the end, it calls to be fed or devoured. And once again, you can see that in Little Red Riding Hood, and then there's other stories with similar patterns as well, or similar aspects, such as Peter and the Wolf. And then you have Saint Margaret of Antioch that also gets swallowed by a dragon, but climbs out of it, or in some iteration she kind of bursts out of it with the cross. And so this isn't necessarily arbitrary. There's many stories that cover this. There's also North African tales with children or people being eaten and then coming out of releasing themselves from the grips of beasts and different animals. And it's all trying to cover the same thing. And so I hope I didn't ramble too much and this made sense. But I would be interested to hear what other people think. And I hope to talk to everybody very soon. If you enjoyed the content here on my channel, please like and subscribe, and if you would like to learn more, I have a blog on my website where you can learn more about symbolism as well as short form videos and articles on my Instagram page. Thank you for listening, and I hope you tune into the next one.